Mr. Speaker, I rise to speak in support of the Health Protection Amendment Bill. And
I might call a member soon.
Mrs. Waiter? So, Mr. Speaker, this is a red letter.
King.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a red letter day in terms of health legislation. The Health Protection Amendment Bill, which the Labor Party supports, is one that has been waiting for its day to come, waiting for over 8 years, 8 long years, because the Public Health Bill was first introduced by the Honourable Pete Hodson regarding infectious diseases. It was so urgent that we've waited 8 years for it to pass. But putting that to one side, we are pleased that we've reached the third reading of this bill. And this bill does do a number of things that are very positive. It improves the range of measures available to protect the public from harm associated with some diseases. And these are a range of infectious diseases that are notifiable to a medical officer of health. And the key thing is, without identifying information of the patient or the diseased person. It will include HIV infection, gonorrheal infection, acquired immunodeficiency syndrome and syphilis. And there was a lot of concern by those who do work in public health and staff that work in the health agencies, that the management of this area over a sustained period was hindered by a bill that was not up to modern standards and up to scratch, and in fact was long overdue for us to make these amendments. I have to say that the Health Select Committee itself worked very hard on this bill, as we do on most bills and petitions. We are a very hard-working committee, and we usually find ways to come to agreement on most things. So we did agree on part one of this bill, the three measures that are introduced, which are contact tracing, the increase in the range of disease that are notifiable, and the option for the management of individuals with significant infectious diseases. But we were not in agreement with part two of this bill, although I do believe that members of the government opposite would have liked to have supported my supplementary order paper at the committee stage, which would have banned sunbeds in New Zealand, which would have banned them because of the danger of them. And, you know, I always like to think that we lead Australia in most things. And we're very proud as a small nation that we can do things nimbly, that we can do things in a way that a big bureaucratic government process that they have in Australia makes it difficult. But Australia has banned sunbeds because they have seen the health risks of them. And we should have done the same. But unfortunately, our minister decided that he would ban them for those who are 18 and under. They were going to ban them for an age group because they were old enough to make a decision. This is how the minister decided that we will approach public health issues. So, if you want to choose to smoke, why are we wasting money on trying to help people to stop? I mean, I found the whole argument about saying that the overriding issue was if, and this is what the Ministry of Health said, it would prevent access to sunbed services by adults who are well informed and choose to take the risk of UV tanning for cosmetic purposes. Well, I think this was a very limit risk approach. I would have expected a former doctor, a former medical doctor, to have picked up this issue and led on it in New Zealand, who would have said we are not going to continue to allow people in New Zealand to use some commercial sunbeds that lead to melanoma. And I don't say that lightly, Mr. Speaker, because we do know that the use of sunbeds increases the risk of melanoma by 75% as shown in the analysis of over 20 epidemiological studies. They concluded that the risk of melanoma is increased by 75% when the use of tanning devices starts before the age of 30. Not 18, the age of 30. And so would we not listen to that sort of evidence? Wouldn't Professor Gluckman, the Chief Science Advisor, be saying to the Minister of Health, the evidence is overwhelming, that if you use this product, 75% increase the risk of getting melanoma, increase the risk of a terrible cancer. And here we are about to spend tens of millions of dollars on a melanoma drug, a drug that is for advanced melanoma when it's reached the point where most people are unlikely to survive. But we're not prepared to take the opportunity to ban commercial sunbeds. We don't need them. You can get enough from the sun, the natural sunlight. And what we also know is that those who operate the sunbeds aren't always the best of folk when it comes to ensuring that those who use them ought to be using them. And we were told at the Select Committee that the Consumer New Zealand Institute survey found that 40% of sunbed operators failed to implement basic safety checks. The public health units carried out a systematic assessment of 97 establishments and found only 35% of operators complied with a joint standard. Half-hearted regulation doesn't work in this area. And now we're putting in a regime that is a regulatory regime that has to then be checked and followed up and monitored and inspected. The cleanest, easiest thing to do in this case would have been to have banned them. If people want to use sunbeds in their own home, that is their choice. But there is no need for us to be providing commercial sunbeds. And my worry is particularly for young people under the age of 30 who decide they need to look good because they need to be brown. And they spend hours in these sunbed operators so that they feel that they look better, while at the same time increasing their risk of melanoma. There is another thing that I found interesting, because the Minister now has decided that he's going to do further consultation on the restriction of sunbeds. At the same time, we're passing this legislation. Well, we waited 8 years to get to today. We could have waited a few more months for his further consultation on what further restrictions that he might like on sunbeds. It just doesn't add up. I think it must be half-hearted consultation, because otherwise a minister on top of his portfolio has said, hang on, let's not pass this bill now. I'm doing further consultation on restrictions, and maybe I'd like to include them in this bill, or maybe on the advice I receive, I would like to ban sunbeds altogether. I do not believe, knowing those who are in public health within the Ministry of Health, that they support this move. I believe that they would have wanted us to take the public health approach, which would have removed something that is unnecessary in New Zealand for people to become more beautiful by having a browner body when we have the sun that is available. And I don't believe they would have supported a move that would see 75% increase in the risk of melanoma for those under the age of 30 who use sunbeds in New Zealand. The Australians were clever enough to see it, and we have the highest rate of melanoma in the world. We're ahead of Australia now, and they have taken a sensible measure. I'm very, very disappointed in this particular measure, and I'm sorry that the government could not see fit to have ban the sunbeds altogether, which my supplementary order paper would have done. So we will support the passage of this bill because it does put in place some restrictions for those that are 18 and under, but it doesn't go far enough. And I look forward to the day, Mr. Speaker, when as Minister of Health I will move a legislation that does ban it, so that the cost of paying for very high-cost melanoma drugs when people are at the end of their life will be unnecessary, because we will do what we can to prevent it before people end up with such a nasty cancer.
Simon